Alright, so both of the monitors behind me are 144Hz. One of them is a 38-inch ultrawide and the other one is 27-inch 4K. But which of them offers the best gaming experience? Well, it's actually a more difficult choice than you might think, but the good news is pretty much all of the new high-end GPUs that have launched recently can take advantage of these new high-end monitors. Even the $500 RTX 3070 will get you most of the way there. So do you go with the higher pixel density of 4K or the wider aspect ratio and immersion of the curved ultrawide? Well, a lot of it does depend on the types of games that you are playing, so let's start with that and take a look at what else you need to know. Firstly, an overview of the two monitors that we're taking a look at today, which are both recent releases from LG. First up is my own daily driver, the 27-inch 4K 144Hz 27GN950. And honestly, I don't think I gave this monitor enough praise and credit in my initial review. Since that video, I've used it every single day, and it really just blows me away how uncompromising this thing is. Many would agree that 27 inches is a bit small for 4K resolution, but I do sit reasonably close to this on my desk, and I've never felt that it was too small that way. This also comes with a huge benefit. A higher resolution on a smaller panel means greater pixel density, but more on that in just a moment. Then there's the ultrawide, which LG kindly sent over for comparison, the 38WN95C. 38 inches with a resolution of 3840 by 1600, nano IPS panel, and a glorious 144Hz refresh rate. Now, to be fair, they do have faster ultrawides in their Ultra Gear lineup, which is what the 27GN950 falls under, but this is actually more of a gaming monitor than it would appear. Both of these monitors have G-Sync and FreeSync support, so you'll have synced frames all the way up to 144Hz on both displays, as well as fairly quick response times. But now let's take a look at a handful of different games. Which ones benefit from that ultra-wide gaming monitor and that 21:9 aspect ratio, and where should you kind of just stick to a 16:9 monitor instead? Also, what does ultra-wide scaling actually even look like in modern titles? Well, to save us both a bit of time there, ultra-wide scaling in modern games is actually pretty damn good. Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, illustrates what is pretty much ideal. UI elements are pushed off to the sides, you gain additional field of view on the edges with no cropping vertically. So gameplay is left feeling a lot more open and inviting, but for cutscenes, this game defaults back to 16:9 with letterboxing. Star Wars Squadrons has pretty much flawless scaling as well, just extra field of view gained here on the sides. This is also graphically one of the best games that I've had a chance to play this year, and ultrawide only adds to that experience. Then Witcher 3, again, great scaling off to the edges, allowing you to see a lot more of that landscape, and also pushing those UI elements off out of the center view. One thing to look out for though when it comes to ultrawide scaling in games is how far the edges of the screen become stretched. This is totally normal, by the way. It's called perspective distortion. Watch this tree in the middle of the screen expand as it approaches peripheral vision. This will usually become more apparent and distracting in games which already have a large field of view at 16:9, where stretching out to 21:9 widens the camera field of view even more and distorts the perspective even further. This was actually really apparent in Apex Legends, where sure, you do gain additional field of view with no vertical cropping, but the edges of the screen become extremely stretched. This leaves you with a fairly skewed gaming experience where objects that are on the edge of the screen appear significantly closer than they are and move a lot faster than they should be. Luckily, this game has an FOV slider which will allow you to correct that to some degree, but then you will be tightening the vertical crop of the screen as well. This is one instance where playing on 16:9 is a better experience in my opinion. Similar story for Call of Duty Modern Warfare or Warzone, and also F1 2020. There is an FOV slider in both of these games which will allow you to correct the otherwise skewed experience, and a lot of that comes down to personal preference and trying to find the balance between improved gaming immersion versus the extra field of view being distracting. Some of you might actually like that skewed edge experience, and having those objects off to the side feel a lot closer and moving a lot faster. It definitely makes F1 2020 feel a lot faster than a 16:9 display. And in Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption 2, I honestly didn't find it distracting at all, and it really is those open world adventure style games where I think ultrawide monitors really shine. There's just something about being able to see more of the game environment that allows you to be immersed in it even more. I find it a lot more involving than a standard 16:9 display. And then there are those few games out there that plainly just don't want anything to do with 21:9, although those are usually highly competitive titles like Overwatch or Valorant, for example. So both of these monitors are fairly quick. 144Hz is by no means slow, but it's the 4K monitor that's going to be slightly harder to drive from your PC because it has a slightly higher resolution. But what's really interesting is the fact that the 4K monitor actually feels a little bit faster than the larger 38-inch ultrawide, and I feel like this is mainly just due to the smaller panel size of the 27-inch 4K. That way the transition from frame to frame is a lot smaller, so the transitions feel quicker and less noticeable. So I feel like there's something really interesting to keep in mind. Despite the 4K monitor being slightly harder to drive overall, it did feel a little bit more responsive and say better for first-person shooters. Another thing in favor of the 4K monitor is that pixel density, and throughout this review, testing a bunch of games on both of them, on the 4K monitor, you really do feel like you're seeing some games for the first time. It sounds odd, but really, the amount of detail that you just wouldn't see at lower resolutions is seriously insane. Apex Legends, for example, a game that I've played hundreds of hours on with a high refresh rate 1080p panel, but 4K just makes this game feel different. Weapons that I've picked up potentially thousands of times in this game, I feel like I'm holding and seeing for the first time. Call of Duty Warzone is another example, and this is a game which looks dramatically different at higher resolutions. At 4K, you no longer get that shimmering effect from distant terrain and trees. Everything looks super crisp, and again, the weapon models are unbelievably clear. At 4K and 27 inches, we're getting a pixel density of 163 pixels per inch, which is roughly 50% higher than that of the ultrawide, which comes in at 109 ppi. Now, the ultrawide is by no means a soft looking monitor. It's still a noticeable step up from 1080p, but you can still notice some jagged edges if you don't have anti-aliasing enabled. With the 4K monitor, on the other hand, edge aliasing is significantly less noticeable, to the point where even enabling anti-aliasing in some games just feels like a total waste. Now, as I mentioned in my full review of the 27GN950, all of those pixels and all of that super clear detail is really worth nothing unless you can actually drive those high frame rates. After all, gaming immersion isn't delivered from a static scene, it's from interacting from the game world and that responsiveness that you get from a high frame rate and a high refresh rate. And that rings true for both of these monitors. They really do come to life at 144Hz, and that's the first thing that you should consider if you are planning on picking either of these up. If you don't have the graphics power to properly drive these at high frame rates, say above 100 FPS, I think most of you will have a much better gaming experience on a lower resolution panel. To be fair, the sweet spot for most gaming setups these days is probably a 27-inch 1440p 144Hz monitor. Those specs are a lot easier to drive with mainstream GPUs, and the monitors themselves are in a lot more of an affordable price range. When it comes to a general web browsing experience, the ultrawide wins this hands down in my opinion, and I can see that being really appealing to a lot of users, since that's what most of us probably do on our PCs most of the time. The horizontal pixel count is the same on both of these monitors, 3840, but you also have to consider Windows 10 scaling. The 38-inch ultrawide runs at 100% Windows scaling by default and looks great, whereas I run my 27-inch 4K monitor at 125% scaling, which is actually smaller and denser than the default 150% scaling. So for example, here I just don't have the room to open up a ton of windows and applications and see them all at the same time. So if that's important to you, definitely consider an ultrawide instead. But it's actually the vertical pixel count that matters a lot to me personally when it comes to something like video editing, and that's where the 4K monitor has the edge. Even despite the 27-inch monitor being smaller than the 38-inch ultrawide, I have more overall pixel real estate to work with. This matters a lot when it comes to building up a lot of layers on your timeline and still having a high refresh rate reference window of what you're working on. An ultrawide can show you more of your timeline horizontally and can give you potentially 2 program monitors, but after editing over 400 videos on the channel, I've realized that's not really important to my workflow. So then, ultra-wide or 4K? Well, for me, it's going to be 4K. I absolutely love the 27GN950. It does feel that slight bit more responsive than the larger panel on the 38-inch ultra-wide. I love the pixel density on that panel as well, and like I said, the extra vertical pixels is really helpful for me as an end user for something like video editing. And believe it or not, it's also half the price of this specific ultra-wide, $800 US versus $1,600. Although if you're okay with a 34-inch panel instead of 38 inches, you can save quite a bit of cash and also get a slightly faster panel in the end too. I will say though, there are times where I actually do prefer the 38-inch ultra-wide over the 27-inch 4K monitor. I found it much better for general use and browsing. Some might prefer it for video editing as well, and for those open world games and also racing games, I think this is as good as it gets. So if you prefer those games, definitely consider this instead. And again, these are 2 top-end enthusiast tier monitors that do demand quite a lot of graphics power to get the most out of. So I will leave these 2 linked down below, but I'll also leave a few more mainstream options linked down there as well. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.